Hi, it's Dr. Warden from Hopkins Family Med and Urgent Care, and today we're going to be starting on our nutrition section, and the first section we'll be starting on is the fat section. So today I'm going to be explaining a little bit more about fats, how essential it is as part of our diet, and then I'll be breaking down the fats to you. Thank you. Hi, it's Dr. Warden, and we're going to continue now with the fat section of our nutrition part. So let's start off with fat. What is fat exactly? Fat is actually a greasy, waxy, oily substance, and that we can get either from plants or we can get from animals. Although a lot of folks like to think that fat is so unhealthy, we actually need fats because without that, we'll have a lot of problems absorbing fat-soluble vitamins and minerals. We'll have issues with blood clotting, we'll have issues with gene expression, and also that fat is actually what is helping to make our cell membranes for our cells, part of the bile acids in which we use to absorb fats. And also our hormones have a good amount of fat. So it's very important for us to know that the source of fat is more important. Source, or where we actually get that fat, is more important. So let's say, for example, whole foods, whole plant-based foods has a different kind of fat than one would see coming from, let's say, a piece of steak or a piece of pork. Those fats coming from whole plant foods are more neutral or healthier fats than animal or processed vegetable oils, and we'll get into that. So when we eat, we actually absorb that fat, and that becomes the fatty acids, which actually travel in our bloodstream, and it's usually connected to low density lipoprotein, or LDL. So I should also say to you, while I'm talking about fatty acids, that fatty acids come together to make up, a group of them come together to make up triglycerides. So think of fatty acids like amino acid, and think of triglycerides like protein, in the sense that fatty acids make up the triglycerides just like amino acids make up protein. I should also discuss cholesterol. So cholesterol is fat, but that fat is usually made from animals. And so us as human beings, we actually produce our own cholesterol, and that is produced by the liver. So the liver actually produces anything between 800 to 1,000 milligrams of cholesterol a day. So we really don't need to get cholesterol from other sources, but we do get cholesterol from products, and that can come in the form of eggs, it can come in the form of dairy, it can come in the form of just meat in general. But cholesterol comes from animals. There's also a different type of cholesterol that we can find in plants, and that is called phytosterols. So phytosterols are kind of like the cholesterol of plants, and that phytosterols actually has anti-inflammatory properties, anti-cancer properties, and it can actually reduce the cholesterol that we have in our bodies. One thing I do want to point out about phytosterols is the fact that it can affect the absorption of carotenoids. So carotenoids is actually the pigmentation that you might see, the fatty pigmentation that you might see in red fruits and vegetables, orange fruits and vegetables, yellow fruits and vegetables. So essentially, these are the four things that I wanted to go over. So now we're going to break down fats. We're going to break them down into good fat, bad fat, and what I call the ugly fat. So good fat I'm gonna break them down into monosaturated fat and polysaturated fat. These fats are usually fats that are neutral or healthier fats. And then the polysaturated fat is now also broken down into essential fatty acids. Now, the body cannot make essential fatty acids, so we have to get it from an outside source. We have to get it from our food. And usually that essential fatty acid is usually two essential fatty acids that we have here, and that's the linoleic and the alpha linoleic acid. You may not know it as that. What you may know it as omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. Now that is even further broken down to highly unsaturated fat, the omega-6, and the omega-3 is broken down even further into EPA and DHA. Now I should tell you that if you are a strictly plant-based person, you're not getting direct EPA and DHA. There's no direct source of EPA and DHA. But most of the times you can get this from specialty products, sometimes eggs you can get that through. But one big source of these EPA and DHA are salmon, herring, mackerel, these type of fish, fatty fish, they usually have this EPA and DHA. The only thing about that though is there's also a lot of impurities, mercury, these type of things when we're eating fish, and it's something that we have to pay very close attention to. Usually there's a lot of omega-6 in the standard American diet. There's a lot of omega-6 in there. So usually that's not the one that we're always concerned about as much as we're concerned about this omega-3. This omega-3 is one of those ones that we are always concerned if we're getting enough. One good source of balanced omega-3 and omega-6 is actually flaxseed. But flaxseed, when you use it, it should be grounded flaxseed, because the grounded flaxseed, actually you can have all of the source, all of the nutrients, because it's already grounded and you can really absorb that. Usually you need about 2 to 4 times the amount of omega-6 to omega-3. Usually that's the ratio in which we usually use. So this really breaks down a little bit more of the good fat in terms of mono. Mono, you usually find it in like canola oil, olive oil. These usually have a good source. And you can always look up other sources, and we can certainly add that at the end of this lecture. But monosaturated, polysaturated, these are our good fats. And then that's even broken down to LA and ALA. And that obviously is broken down into highly unsaturated fat and of course EPA and DHA. Let's talk about bad fat. When I say bad fat, I'm really talking about the saturated fat, the fat that's solid at room temperature. Usually we get a lot of this saturated fat from animal products, and we also get this from plant products too. Two of the most common and more familiar ones that we see saturated fat that's solid at room temperature, is the coconut oil and the palm oil. Usually that's where we see plant-based saturated fat. Let's move on to what I call the ugly fat. The ugly fat is the trans fat. Trans fat is actually unsaturated fat that is chemically processed either by means of partial hydrogenation or hydrogenation, whereas they take that unsaturated fat and they chemically process it. One very good example of trans fat is margarine. Margarine is chemically processed. and that's the reason why you can find it on the shelf. And because it usually has, what happens is when they chemically process this unsaturated fat, it most of the times they do that to enhance the flavor and also to have a longer shelf life. So trans fat is that kind of fat, that margarine, that type of stuff. I do want to point out to you that when you're doing a lot of this margarine or this trans fat that is chemically changed, it definitely affects the absorption of the EPA and the DHA, and also affects the formation of those two fatty acids. So this is one section that we're going to talk about. Then we're going to be going into part 2 of our fat section.